tell us a bit about your journey, where you started, how you ended up being the chief product officer at Spaceship, and what is a CPO?
Awesome. Look, thank you very much, Dan, Hans, and the entire UX Brisbane team for having me on your program. It's such an honor. I was lucky enough to spend a couple of weeks in Brisbane over the Christmas period, and that's where I actually met Dan. And one key observation when I came back to Sydney is that driving is so much better in Brisbane than it is in Sydney, because when you indicate to change lanes, people actually let you in. So thank you guys for being very generous with your lane space. So a bit about me really quickly. I have two beautiful boys. My wife is pretty awesome. I have a really cool team that I'm lucky to be part of at Spaceship. And, you know, going back to my background, I studied finance and IT as my undergrad. I've done my end courses along the way in executive leadership. I started out at ComSec on the trading floor back in the days where ComSec was really small. Now they're almost this big monopoly. So when people think ComSec, they think big. It's amazing how quick they got, you know, back in the days where kind of they were adding kind of additional servers as they went because they didn't anticipate the load. That was pretty cool back then, being part of a startup that really grabbed the market and really took it and owned it. It was pretty cool. I did lots of work as a BA at AGL, at Investec Bank. I landed at St. George. That was my first product role. And the timing of that, and I'm going to start showing my age really soon, was when broadband speeds had started picking up. And that was around 2006. And customers started being okay with doing transactions online that used to be ones that they reserved for often. Internet banking started becoming more of a thing that you did all the time rather than ad hoc things. So I was really lucky. I came in, I saw we had a pretty solid product set in the consumer finance world. Consumer finance is your kind of unsecured lending, credit cards, personal loans, that kind of stuff that you can, you know, you need money, you need it quickly, you can just have it. And I saw that this internet as a channel was starting to evolve, and there was a lot of traffic to our site. And I started thinking to myself, well, what if we went aggressively after this channel, albeit at the time we were getting no sales through it? I said, what if we tried something? Let's put up a website that allows customers to sign up. Let's have a look at the data, the traffic coming through. Lots of traffic, poor conversion. Oh, what's that telling us? Maybe if we can kind of make the downstream process a little bit easier with less to do for a customer, it can work better. We did it. It worked. We did more. It worked. We did it more. It worked. We did it for other products. Westpac bought us out. They said, hey, what are you guys doing in that internet channel thingy over there at St. George? Can we replicate for Westpac? I said, sure, let's do it. And we did that, and it worked. So I was pretty lucky in the timing of my opportunity coming into St. George and the kind of a merger of Westpac Banking Corporation, which gave us a lot of funding to do lots of really cool things. Was pretty lucky to sort of get to run the internet banking channel for a long time, which was really cool. We allowed customers to do lots of things rather than just transact and see their transaction history. We allowed them to self-service, administer their accounts, open accounts, close accounts. We really started to think of why are there things that customers can't do themselves? And again, that was at a period in time where other banks hadn't done it yet, global banks hadn't done it, which was really, really cool. And then eventually the knock came from Spaceship. CEO of Spaceship was someone that I had worked with previously in my banking career. And he knocked on the door and I thought to myself, well, you know what? Fintech sounds cool. It sounds more hipster. It sounds, when people ask you what you do for a living, you want to tell them you're in fintech. So I wanted to know what this fintech thing was about. It sounded cool for an outsider. For an insider, now I can tell you it is actually really cool. So yeah, I'm very lucky to be where I am. The second part of your question, Dan, was about what does a CPO actually do? So my role spans across data analytics, design, the product management, both traditional and digital product management, and also the customer success team, which is pretty awesome because I also have the team that speaks to our customers day in, day out, reporting into me. So it's really cool because I hear directly what customers are concerned about. I hear directly what customers are happy about. So my days, but your role as a CPO or a chief product officer is really, you are the custodian of value creation for customers and for the business. So value creation is, does the product solve a problem that is worth solving? Does the customer get value from transacting with you and choosing you over a competitor? Does the business make money solving those problems for customers? Because without that viability, you can solve as many problems as you want, but you're going to run out of investor cash really quickly. So your role is to set the vision and the strategy, to create the culture, create the expectations of what it means to be part of this team. I have a culture in my team where I don't like I people, I like we people. I don't like someone who wants to take credit for work. I reckon your work speaks for yourself, for itself. You don't have to go around and kind of publicize it. And I also like people who are willing to put down what they're doing to help someone else. So your role is to build, lead, coach the team that's responsible for delivering for the customer and the business. You've got to be an advocate of the organization and the product. I'm wearing my Spaceship t-shirt right now. I'm not sure if you guys can see it.
Can definitely see it.
Hopefully, how many people are in this session? 38. I'm hoping for 38 sign-ups during the next hour. That's what I'm hoping for. You've got to be a servant leader. You've got to be there for your team to remove their own obstacles and create an environment where they can flourish. You've got to have some thick skin because the popular decision is not always the right decision. So you've got to be okay with people not being happy with your decisions. And you've got to be able to stand in front of your team and take the hit when things are not going well. And when things are going well, you've got to stand in the background and, you know, put them on a pedestal and keep motivating them to do more as much as you can. So my role has been, hopefully that creates a bit of context, and different product people will say different things, but I'm about the facts. I let the data dictate what we do. I love opinions, but I make decisions based on facts.
Wow. See, that's super interesting. So like on your role, you touched on several different interesting points about like, you know, value creation, creating the culture, looking after the product, and actually like choosing the right people for the right job and creating like that culture where people, you know, can shine, right?
Yep.
I'm actually, if we step it back and before we go into like deeper into like team and so on, in your story, you're mentioning you transitioned from Westpac to Spaceship, both kind of still being in that, you know, technology, into like banking, technology, finance. What was some of the key differences you found going from like big corporation like Westpac to a team like Spaceship, for example, which would be, I assume, like smaller?
Lots of differences. At Westpac, the sheer magnitude of people and process in place, designed to keep you out of trouble, right? Largely, most of it is designed with good intent. But over long periods of time, things accumulate and process becomes more dominant than outcome in terms of what you're trying to do. Skills, typically in larger organizations, I've seen deeper skill sets. So smaller bandwidth of roles, but deeper skill sets. So someone will be a real expert in risk. Someone will be a real expert in UI build, UI design, experience design, research. At Spaceship, we have one person who's our head of design that does everything, right? So the roles are wider and shallower at Spaceship, and obviously deeper and narrower at a Westpac. At a Westpac, you've got the fail-safes in and around you. There's someone making sure you obligations from a regulation perspective to a much more deeper level than you have. So as a product person, you need to step up your game when it comes to things like making sure you know your regulatory obligations. In a fintech, you can obviously move quicker. Our tech stack is pretty young, right? It's 4 years old. You know, something that I can do in 2 weeks here at Spaceship may take us 6 weeks, 12 weeks over at Westpac. And it's not for lack of trying or lack of effort or people don't work hard enough. It's just that the systems, processes, and things in and around execution are a lot more detailed and prescriptive. We'd like to say that we're in an environment at the moment where we allow people to have a go, take a risk, get stuff done, fail fast, fail quickly, but as long as you get that learning and you iterate based on it as quickly as you can.
Awesome. Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to touch on that is because even within our community here, as designers, we all kind of work in different organization structures. Some are big, some are small, and like you were saying, some of us are very specific in one area of design. Some of us kind of do it all. So it's really interesting, and which kind of brings up my other like another point here, which is like if you look at the new ways of working, a lot of us work in squads and so on, and a lot of times a recurring theme that keeps coming up is as designers, right, where do we actually fit in? How do we work within a squad? A
Yeah.
lot of times we feel like things are so development heavy. It's like, well, we kind of feel left out. Like, where do we come in?
Well, that's a really good question. And I get asked this question not just from design, I get asked this question from everyone. Right? So to a leader, the utopian state of how an agile team is working is that I, as the leader, can go there and I can stand there in the middle of a stand-up, uninvited, you know, and not really know who works in what role. I would love to go to a stand-up and just hear that everyone is working to a common goal, common cadence, with common principles and common ways of working. And that to me would be the utopian state. I love how in an agile environment, the product owner is bringing the problem to the table. And that is because that's their job. Their job is to know product market fit, know what problem needs to be solved, know what the prioritization is, and that's what they bring into the actual agile squad or scrum. But it doesn't mean that they now dictate solutions to the team. I love for a whole team to have the same KPIs, so that if you're an engineer, you're a tester, you're a developer, you're an architect, you're a designer, you're a product owner, you all have the same KPIs. So imagine this: we give you a KPI as a cross-functional team, and your team is the growth team, and we say, get us to 1 million customers in 5 years. Okay, that's our KPI. We have how many sprints between now and 5 years? You can do the math. Mm-hmm. Each sprint, as long as you're pulling in from your backlog an idea that will capture as much value in that capacity, in the right sequence, doesn't matter what the end experience looks like, because you're going to have to do something good for the customer, because if you don't, the customer's not going to come, or if they come, they're not going to stay. And by virtue of you doing something good for the customer, you're going to do something good for the business. Because whether you increase your engagement rates, whether you increase the amount of goodwill you've built with the customer, and the customer then refers their friends and family, ultimately, do good for the customer, good things will happen for the business. But you as a designer in that team got every right to ask questions, to challenge behind the problem, to look at the data, to bring in your ideas, your thoughts, your opinions, but even better, bring in your facts. And the facts for you guys as designers are data. Data is a fact base. You can use data to your advantage. You can benchmark against competitors and see what they've done to solve the problem and say, all right, it's an open book exam because we're benchmarked against the competitors. How do we go and one-up them? How do we do it better because it's an open book exam and I don't have to reinvent the wheel? How about we start from, this is the problem, this is what they've done, but this is what we can do. So bring that fact base and be willing to challenge the problem, challenge the solutions, ideate, suggest, and ultimately, in that huddle around the problem, you're going to diverge to collect ideas, you're going to converge on what ideas get prioritized. You've got an equal voice to everyone else as a designer in that team. And then you're going to diverge and converge around solutions. Speak up. Don't just take what a dominant product owner is saying as gospel. And I don't like dominant product owners. I like product owners who know their product and are vocal, but I like product owners who are able to extract ideas from everyone around both the problem and the solution. But then it gets to a point where we've spoken enough, let's just make a call and run with it. Because you don't want to just keep going around in circles forever, ideating and never delivering. So that's where the fine line becomes. But you as a designer, you've got all the blessings you have at all times to go and make those, provide that input and provide direction, provide facts as much as you can. But ultimately, you're the voice of the customer because you're going to design the felt experience of the solution. So when you're building, be the customer. When you're designing, be the customer. But don't get caught up in petty detail like, oh, the size of the button, the color, the font, a checkbox here and there, or I've seen so many useless conversations about that. Big picture, the right problems, and keep your eye on the prize.
So that's a really interesting point, right? Like I want to touch on two things you mentioned. One, saying like, yep, we're the voice of the customer, and like, we're supposed to be the advocate and try to do the best and try to focus on that common goal that we're all working for, right?
Yep.
A lot of times, like we're not working towards a common goal because everyone has their own KPIs that they're trying to get there.
Yep.
When it comes to ways of working, you can find that different teams have their own ways of working. And when it comes to wanting to create the best value for customers, a lot of times it's actually dictated by business. They say, this is what we got to do. Here's the solution. Go do some like creative UX to solve it with the limit, like with what we have, instead of trying to reverse it and be like, okay, this is the best we can do. Okay, what can we do with the technology we have?
Yeah. No, you're gonna have to work with whatever constraints the organization is placing upon you, Daniel.
Mm.
So what I really like, and can I assume there's nothing at the moment? Yeah, I will just make that assumption. Our designer at Spaceship is actually the pinnacle of what I've seen in being able to work with constraints. The constraints can come from many places, right? What I kind of discussed before about an agile team, I discussed a utopian agile team, one that is built and that is capacity that is continuously funded, so you're never worried about team numbers diminishing, and being given the free will and cadence to work towards one target over a period of time. So they're committed to a journey, right? But some organizations don't work that way. Some organizations fund based on projects, or they don't have full agile yet. They're at an embryonic stage. So different teams are at different points. If you're a team that's working waterfall and you're trying to introduce bits of agile into that operating rhythm, you're going to have to work with, the structure. The waterfall is structure of business case, and typically business case has been done by someone who's not actually going to deliver the project, but someone somewhere on the business in the strategy team has put together a business case, got some funding promising to achieve certain targets, and because of that you've now got some funding that's allocated to build a team. You've built a team and you're now a member in that team as the designer, but that team's already been told what it needs to do. But you can still influence to an extent, right? Ultimately, for that business case to be successful, it just needs to hit its metrics, right? It doesn't necessarily need to hit its metrics based on the prescribed methodology that was put in the business case initially, right? As long as you can come up with solutions that are still within the same risk profile as what was promised, that can still achieve that outcome. If your business owner or decision maker is not willing to listen, then you're working in the wrong environment, or you're working for the wrong people, right? Because we as business leaders have to be malleable enough, influenced by our people, especially if they bring us facts or options that may be better for the customer or better for the business or a better use of the funding. But sometimes decisions are made based on risk appetite, decisions are being made based on lack of knowledge or lack of know-how, or decisions are made based on the fact that the people in the know are not talking to the decision makers. So you've got to just either work with those constraints or try to find a way to get in front of the decision maker more often, not to kind of overstep your kind of middle management, but with their blessings, they can take you with them.
Perfect. And so here's the thing, right? And it's something that again, like a lot of designers like struggle with, which is you get so passionate about your product and you want to create the best value, but then you then put it in front of someone and they immediately shut it down, right? Because there's that element of like, no, I need to show you the value, I need to show you this, and yeah, we can like refer to data and like with experience. When you're like stuck in those situations where you're trying to show your concepts and try to show the value, how do you go? What do you find the best way of being like, hey, like here's this concept, I know you probably will shut it down for whatever reason because of business or risk or whatever, but how do you get it like across the line or at least find that compromise?
Well, yeah, this is where you need to use your influencing skills, right? You need to find the right person with the right level of organizational power. You need to get in front of them and somehow understand what they are trying to achieve and see if you can align what you're trying to do to their outcomes. Then you're doing the sales pitch based on what's in it for them. And once you have that advocate that's going to support you, that executive level with enough pulling power to be able to get others on board or advocate on your behalf, then more doors are going to be open for you. Now, we are talking about organizations here with a larger hierarchy, and this should never happen. especially in startup world, because in startup world, you're not going to transform by being very hierarchical. You're not going to transform by running the way an incumbent does. You're going to have to be different. You're going to have to try and do things that haven't been done before. And by virtue of doing that, it means you're taking risk every day. Get comfortable with it. Get comfortable being in an ambiguous environment. Get comfortable being in an environment where you're going to do stuff that the incumbents are going to actually frown upon and try to shoot down. But that's also okay, because if they're trying to shoot it down, it means they're scared of it. So look, you're going to get resistance inside your organization. You're going to get resistance from the market that doesn't want you to be there. And ultimately, it's about your hustle and your influencing skills. But as a designer, the best thing about what you can do is that you can make whatever you're pitching look real. You can actually mock it up. You can prototype it. You can put it in someone's hands and imagine you're trying to buy a home and you landed on this page that consumed all your third-party banking data, where you didn't have to fill in an application form, and somehow using aggregated data, options around what is possible for you are presented to you as a customer. Now, how would you like to be the first bank to do that? And I'll give you that example because I know it's possible. It can be done. Why hasn't anyone done it yet? Because decision makers in large organizations that can afford to do it don't understand it.
Wow. Okay. No, that's really powerful. And yes, you're right. Like putting something tangible in front of someone can definitely get things across the line a lot faster because it makes it real.
Absolutely.
That's right. Before I get into the next question, if you guys start adding some of your questions into Slido, I know Felix has put the links down in the comment. So I'll give you guys another few minutes while I ask this next question to go in, and then we'll just take a quick transition to go through some of your questions. When it comes to we talked about team structures and so on, right? When you come into any organization, whether you're in Westpac and moving on to Spaceship, I know that you've built teams there, right? So how did you go about building those teams? What does like a good team structure look like to you? And when you're looking at those people, what are the values you're finding in those people when you're creating that structure?
Yeah, okay. So interesting, because I can probably talk about this topic forever, because it is probably the most important topic around success, right? Organizations don't succeed because they have better ideas than others, right? No organization has, no good ideas. The reality is 90% of failure happens in execution. And execution happens well in an environment with really good teams. So please do not underestimate by any means the importance of working in good teams. And what do I define as a good team? I define a good team as not just a team that calls themselves a team, but a team that truly wants to function as a team. A team that values that I on my own are lesser than I am as part of a team. I don't want to celebrate wins on my own. And the moment you have an individual in the team that likes to celebrate on their own, that team culture is straight away becoming flaky. Why? Because they're going to try to take credit for the team wins. And then the rest of the team will start feeling like there's something there that is creating this lack of integrity or lack of trust. Trust can break so quickly in teams, so please do not underestimate the importance of building good teams. I like teams that celebrate success and celebrate it together. They want to win with their teammates because it's actually boring winning as an individual. I like a team that no matter how bad things get, they don't blame each other. They create positive sentiment and an environment where it's very safe for everyone to speak. There's no bad idea. There's nothing wrong in building something that doesn't work and failing, but we learn something from it, right? Mistakes are okay, right? It is very safe to make a mistake and not be scared, right? Because it means we're innovating. I like the team that's very ambitious and a team that does more than their 9 to 5. Not because I want people not to have a life outside of work, but especially in a startup environment, I want to see that someone says, hey, it's 5 p.m. now, but if I spend the next 2 hours today doing something above and beyond what my capacity allowed for, that unblocks 2 of my teammates. I like someone that will do that. And in an environment where it's a safe environment, that person is also entitled to say, hey, I'm going to knock off at 3 p.m. on Friday and start my weekend a little bit earlier. So I love work-life balance. But I like the person who looks and always thinks about the team above themselves. The second part of your question, which was actually the first part of your question, was really about how do you go about setting up teams. Look, don't set up teams for the sake of it, right? I've had friends, I've seen in organizations I've worked before, people say, oh, I'm going in there and I've been given approval for a headcount of 20 people, I'm going to start recruiting. Well, you've just gone in there, you haven't even learned what the organization's about, you haven't learned how to navigate execution and what the function of each individual is going to be until you spent a bit of time there. So please don't hire just for the sake of hiring. Hire when you're ready to hire. Learn the organization, clear vision for what that organization wants to do, have a clear vision for how your team fits into that overall big picture. Because if your team doesn't fit in the overall big picture, you're not going to succeed, right? And then have a very clear picture for each of the roles you're going to recruit for before you start recruiting. And once you have that in mind, you need to be very transparent in the recruitment process with everyone you speak to about the vision of the organization, how your team fits in the organization, the good things, the bad things in the organization, and the limitations that this person's going to have to deal with when they come into the organization. I love people coming in with their eyes wide open. You don't want to oversell, but you don't want to undersell the role. You oversell the role, really good people will come in and they'll be like, oh, I didn't expect I'd have to deal with all this. You can use whatever language you want, right? And they might not stick around, especially because if they're really, really good at their job, guess what? Recruiters are knocking on their door, right? And the other thing is, if you don't sell the job well enough, the really good people are not going to come. So you got to get that sort of balance really right. I look for language in interviews, nice and early, around a person that's talking about themselves versus the team. I look for consistency in their answers because that's a sign of integrity. Because to me, the two things that are most important are teamwork and integrity, because everything else can be taught. Once they pass those two hurdles, I look for the skill set, the ability, the language about getting things done. Do they have some sort of attitude? Do they have let's get it done attitude? So those things are secondary to me, but definitely integrity and teamwork come first. And that's what you want to build the culture of your team in and around. That's typically my process. I've used that a few times. And even when in teams, you identify people really quickly that fit with where you want to be and what you want to be. You can coach people. Some turn it around and come on that journey. Some don't, and they eventually leave of their own accord because they realize it's not for them.
Wow. No, and that's perfect. And well, what you said is quite nice because a lot of times, like, especially in like big organizations, sometimes you don't feel like you can't make mistakes. You have to get it right every time from the first time. There's that feeling of like you don't feel safe sometimes. You just got to keep hustling, and that's why I always try to outshine another person and so on because there's just so much happening. But again, like if you have a good team and you're having the same goals, it will definitely you're elevating as a team, not as an individual.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. And don't discredit the fact that sometimes then my assumption is that everyone means well, right?
yeah,
But sometimes fear brings out, some bad traits in individuals. And sometimes in larger organizations, there's a lot of crossover between roles
yeah.
that it creates the fight or flight sort of reaction out of people. And again, take them out of a work context and go have a beer with them and they'll be a completely different person.
Beer fixes all. And on that note, I'll pass to Felix to go through some of the Q&A on Slido.
Awesome.
Awesome. So Andrew, so here I got a couple questions here. This one with the 2 likes. If you guys haven't been to Slido yet, go to the link in the chat, start dropping in questions. But first up question, Andrew, what's the biggest challenge facing Spaceship at the moment?
Wow. Okay. I think No, it's very hard to sort of say too much, right? But first and foremost, it's continuing our growth trajectory. We're going really well at the moment, and we want to maintain that momentum. So keeping that momentum up is going to be a real challenge, especially with new competition coming into our space. Sharesies, is in the process of arriving to Australia from New Zealand. You've got Zinja pivoting towards investments, and they're looking to raise some capital at the moment. Then you've got ComSec going really strong with ComSec Pocket, and then you've got Raise, our biggest competitor. There was another group called Superhero. They've got close affiliations with Zip. They're a competitor as well, and that's a space that it's attractive because the younger customer, they've been kind of left out of the loop in the investment space for a long time. No one's really focused on solving their problems and making investing accessible and letting people know that, if you start young enough, you've got plenty of years for that money to compound over time and create an opportunity to have a strong future in front of you. So I think definitely competition in that space is hotting up, and that's going to be a challenge for us.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I totally agree on that point. Like for the younger generations to come into like the investment phase much earlier. So here I have the next question. What are you most proud of in your career, and why?
Wow. Okay. Look, I've been really lucky to have the career I've had. My kind of role, I didn't even know it existed, as I was a young person and as I was studying, etc. And digital product management as a function is something that has really come to the forefront in the last sort of 10, 15 years. In fact, Australia is kind of a little bit under-indexed in that space. So hopefully over the next sort of few years, you're going to see a lot more capability come into that space and a lot more people who really know how to string, data, design, technology, and kind of viability of a business all together to achieve really good outcomes. So, but what I'm truly, really proud of is the teams that I've built and the teams that I've built that have come from such different parts. I've had product managers come in my team from testing, from writing code, from data, from operations, from call centers, from branches. But ultimately, getting people to sort of think customer and then have the 4 quadrants of capability needed to be a really good product and then be able to perform and have careers of their own. So to me, there's nothing I'm more proud of than developing people into really sound product managers who are able to achieve awesome outcomes, just for themselves, customers, and their businesses, but throughout their careers.
Awesome. That's great. Actually, I wanted to elaborate more on that. How do you coach your product managers? Like following up on that question, like building, like you said, your most proudest moment is like to build like these characters, right? Like how do you coach them, or what do you think is like the skill set or mentality, attitude that you think is most needed? Like, yeah.
I think you've half answered the question in your question. I think
Okay.
mentality and attitude they've got to have that to begin with, Felix. They've got to have the right mentality of, I want to learn. I don't know everything, and I won't know everything. The more people I speak to, the more facts I read, the more data I look into, the better I'll become. The more I try, the more I fail, the better I learn, the more I can iterate. So you've got to find people who are okay working in the gray area and not just for some of the time, but be comfortable with that all the time. Mm-hmm. Teaching them to be comfortable with that, teaching them to be comfortable with making the decision and it be okay. And then the language has to be very important when you're speaking to them, because often early on in people's career in product, they come in and ask you questions that require a yes/no answer. Mm-hmm. Push it back towards them. Well, what do you think? What other options do we have? What other options do we have is also the same as saying, no, that's not a good idea. But again, that's the way of stimulating their own thinking and pushing them towards coming up with the answer themselves. because after a couple of times, they'll stop coming and asking those questions because they'll be comfortable in challenging themselves in their own mind to be able to make those decisions themselves. I like to put people in a role where they can start by taking on some small feature to begin with that's not that high a risk, and kind of giving them a bit of a guide, step by step, this is what you need to do and how. And then these are the people that you need to take on the journey with you, and letting them go through each step, then come back and give me feedback. How did it go? What did you learn? How far have you progressed? What does your scope look like? How did you get there? And then as they go through that process, you kind of give them a few tips. Have you thought about also doing this? Have you also thought about looking in this data set? Have you also thought about asking this team for their input? How have you thought about going and spending a day with the customer service team to see how that functionality could benefit them? And these are all the actual bits and bobs that you do as a team leader, but you're not really being prescriptive. What you're trying to do is just get them to be comfortable with collecting, synthesizing, playing back, getting feedback, and then rationing towards a solution. So, and then from a people leadership perspective, you want to develop their own people leadership skills, because ultimately, a product manager in an agile team somewhat quasi plays the people leader role for that feature team. So you want them to have the same skill set, that they can show empathy to the team, they can treat people as people and focus on people and their well-being first, and then secondary is the outcome for the business and the project.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I actually have a follow-up on that one, but I'll save it for later. So next question here from the community. So what's the methodology that the development, design, and product team is using? I'm assuming this question is referring to Spaceship. So yeah. What methodology does the dev, design, and product team use? So
yeah, interesting question. I don't know if you call it a specific methodology. I would say we're using some sort of safe/iterative approach to feature development. We are a very small team. We've got two feature teams, one focused on our micro investments product, one focused on our superannuation product. And what we try to do is, you've got about 5 members in each of the teams. We try to keep things lean with a focus on execution as much as possible. Basically, if you think venture capital backed startup, trying to really grow quickly, we're working within those limitations. But what we try to do is, if I was to explain our high level methodology, it's really starting with what our targets are, and then allowing the team to come up with ideas that get sort of DVF scored. We use the DVF process to actually give us some sort of indicative stack rank of what our priority should be. And as the two separate teams have their DVF stack ranks, the teams are basically picking whatever's sitting at the top of the DVF list at any point in time and taking it through discovery. Once discovered, through to solutioning. At any point in time, the team is solutioning and building one feature, but at the same time discovering the feature that they're going to pick up for delivery in the next sequence. And then based on the outcome delivered, our product managers are then responsible for working with the analytics teams to look at, as quickly as possible after launch, what are the actual leading and lagging indicators are of success or failure, and what have we learned, and sharing that back with the team before we pick up the next piece of work to go through discovery. So I'm not sure what you want to call that methodology, but that's what we do to get things over the line at Spaceship.
Okay, cool, awesome. Thank you so much for that. Dan, do you want to go back to you, or I can keep on going with questions? Yeah. All right. Let me keep going. Okay. So this one was my question that personally, I wanted to follow up on is, if your product manager came to you with a decision that he or she decided with the team, but the exec team doesn't agree on it, how do you step in to make a decision or weigh? Because this kind of ties back into what you were talking about earlier, like they're like comfortable working in the gray area because sometimes they will make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. But then what if the exec team doesn't agree on certain things that the team decided? Like, how would you weigh on that or make a decision? Yeah.
Well, that's a really good question, because that happens all the time, right? So first and foremost, do I agree with what the feature teams come up with? right? So that will sway my kind of judgment, right? If I do agree with what the feature team is proposing, because I believe it's better sequencing or better value capture or brings forward value or de-risks a deliverable. There might be lots of different reasons why the feature team has come up with a recommendation that may contradict what the leadership team would want. But you as the chief product officer, your role is to be the voice of the team on that leadership team. And if you agree and support the rationale and are willing to back it, then you've got to go and fight for it. So your role is to be that first point of call as an escalation for feature delivery teams or design teams. And secondly, you have to fight on their behalf because that's your role. And ultimately, if you are the owner of the product, your voice should carry more weight than others in the leadership team with respect to capturing value.
Yep. Yeah, got you. Like, yeah, like that is always the situation. Like, I won't say always, like it's very common in any organization. So yeah, thank you for that. Actually, on top of that though, like how would you advise someone on building influence? So saying like for someone who wants to take an idea further, they'll need to build this influence like to be able to like influence like the decision, right? Like what would your advice be for someone who wants to build influence in an organization? Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are two parts to the answer, and the two complement each other really well. First and foremost, you need to understand who it is that you're trying to influence and understand them as an individual, because not everyone can be influenced the same way. I'm influenced by fact. You can have your opinion, but if you want to influence me, bring your facts to the table. And when you bring your facts, make sure they're robust. Because I'm going to ask questions, but if there are holes in the facts, it's not that I'm trying to, be difficult or put you down or, or reject that idea. It's the facts have to give you the insight to make a decision and deploy capacity in a certain direction. You've got to make sure that the facts being used are really telling you the truth, right? So you need to understand people and you need to understand how they are influenced. Some other people are influenced because, they've got ambitions and you might go to them with an idea that might help them fulfill their ambitions. You need to understand that too. You need to understand what their purpose is and be able to talk to them in a way that fits with how they like to be influenced, right? And then ultimately, if you're in an organization where everyone is so well aligned, the understanding of individuals is less of a problem because you don't need to customize how you go about influencing them. You can really just go with the facts and the facts will get you the outcome you want. Because ultimately, in a smaller organization, you've got no room for waste. In a large organization, you've got no room for waste, but unfortunately, there is. So I think the two parts to it are facts and understanding individuals. If you can nail both of them and go to the right individual with the right facts, your chances of influencing them is going to be really strong. And just back to what I said before, I look at myself and I say, for me, influence is harder than it is for a designer or a coder. Why? Because a developer can go build it and then come and show it to someone and say, look, I've just built it. I've done it in my own time. Here, look, it works.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of this? Or a designer can prototype it and do the same thing. I can't do either. I'm sitting there trying to influence with words and all this fluffy stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reality is the product market fit can be felt if you can put something in someone's hands. Put it in someone's hands as much as you can because you guys can.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much for that advice. Yeah. Cool. All right. Next question here I got. As the CPO like yourself, like you mentioned, like you don't really do much of the design. So the question here is like, do you find yourself doing much of like the designs, conducting user research, or is your role mostly around just leadership and coordination?
Look, you can make of your role whatever you want to make of it, right?
Yeah.
So when I was speaking with Dan last week, he said to me, he asked me, "What do you do every day at Spaceship?" I just started actually sitting there. I started going through my days and started writing down what I do because I never really thought of it that way. And then I realized these are the habits that I've built that make my day effective. So I start my day by to our data, our dashboards. How did we go yesterday? What are our sales numbers? Is the funnel converting? Is something looking odd apart in the funnel that I'm seeing as an anomaly? Should I call someone? Are customers leaving? What are our churn numbers looking like? I read customers' comments on our app stores in NPS surveys, you know, on social media. And then I speak to our customer success team. How are things going? How are volumes? Our customers are asking about a specific topic. Is there an issue somewhere that I need to know about? And then I feel like I know what's happening. I know what's going on. I feel like I don't need to be in control, but I need to be in the know, if that makes sense. Then what I do is I kind of check in on the team. I don't call them and say, hey, Felix, are you well today? It's awkward, right? They're not going to tell you if they're having a bad day. But I check in and I come up with an excuse to call someone, you know, hey man, I was thinking about this feature. What about this? Just as a suggestion, you know, you and the team, you guys will work it out, but this is my 2 cents worth. And in the response from the person, you can gauge if they're doing okay or not. And then you've got the ability to sort of probe a little bit more and just check in on people. And sometimes it's a really good forum for someone to ask you a question that was buried. And then there are management meetings which are needing to be had. You know, you do them. They are more, these are financials, these are, you know, you do them, right? But then the really cool part of the day is when someone brings me, you know, books me in and says, hey, I've done some analysis, let's go through it. Wow, insight, ideas, opportunities. Or someone's done a prototype on something. Hey, Andrew, I was thinking about this and I've just mocked it up. What do you think? Or, hey, we've just come up with a solution to a problem and we actually think we can get this done really quickly. Is it okay to bring this up in the stack rank and reprioritize it ahead of something else? Hell yeah, show me what you've done, right? I love being in ideation, problem definition, problem solving, data, like looking at the data. I love when designers want to spend some time walking me through proposed solutions. And I'm always saying, well, what about this? Oh, hang on a sec. You've just given me another idea. We can also do this later on. These are the sessions that I live and breathe, and I want to be in those sessions a lot more rather than kind of management overhead, that kind of stuff. That's what makes me really excited, being in those kind of sessions with people. And also, you are the customer. You've got to live and breathe the product. You've got to live and breathe the product internally, looking at how the product works in its operations, its data. But you've got to live and breathe it and experience it as a customer. And you know what you've got to also do? And this is what I do. I live and breathe the products of our competitors. Because as a customer, I try to take my spaceship hat off and use my unbiased eyes and say, as a customer, who's giving me more value? Are they giving me more value, or is Spaceship giving me more value than our competitor? And if I'm not getting enough value from Spaceship, I worry. And why is that company able to give customers more value? Because sometimes that customers will be customers of both of us. And then based on where they see value over time, they might pivot. Or customers might be about to sign up and they're tossing up between 2 or 3 different options. Yep. I need them to feel like Spaceship is the place that's going to give them more value. So I try to sort of live and breathe that every day. I'm benchmarking all the time. I'm downloading apps and delete. I've got so many apps on my phone that I kind of have to delete an app before I can download the next one, just because I'm always playing around with what our competitors are doing. But I think you make of your day whatever you want to make it. As much as my role is by definition a leadership role, I love being in the detail and I don't want to get out of that. In fact, I wish I could design, I wish I could code. I promise you, if there was an idea that was sitting in the backlog that can get done, I would go and stay up tonight and code it up if I could.
Oh man, 100%. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, I'm just being conscious of time. Just one last question from a community. So can you elaborate further? What do you mean by a servant leader, and maybe an example on what that means?
Yeah. Please don't sit there and build a scorecard for every person that you work with going forward off the back of what I say, because that's not fair on them, right? Give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but look for the language that doesn't tell, that asks, that isn't trying to be the face of being done and the final decision maker, but be in the background and almost like the backbone for the team, that the team gets its strength from, but the team is at the forefront. The servant leader is doing the dirty work, is protecting the team, is unblocking the team, is having the difficult conversation on behalf of the team. It's creating that safe environment where, don't worry guys, just get it done. It doesn't matter what happens. If something goes wrong, it's on me. That's the servant leader. And you've got to have some thick skin, because there are going to be lots of people out there in the organization that aren't always happy with your decisions. And if it goes wrong, well, guess who the fingers are going to be pointed at, right? But you've got to be okay with it, because if you're going to transform, you're going to have to make some decisions that are unpopular. You're going to have to make some decisions that are risky. 100%. You're going to have to make some decisions that upset people, because people have their pet projects or their own ideas somehow feel more important than other people's ideas. Somehow allow them to ignore data and say, no, but this is a must do. No, it's not a must do sometimes, and let's customer test it. Let's prototype it and get some feedback, because I can prototype it in a day and do a customer test, and all of a sudden I've saved ourselves 2 or 3 sprints building something that customers didn't want. So turn your product function into a science as much as you can. Hypothesis test. Qualitative testing gives you some ability to iterate whatever it is that you're going to put before a customer for quantitative testing, and the quantitative testing helps you with your decision making. Stop building for samples of one. Stop listening to the loud minority, because somehow they make it sound like they're the majority.
Yep.
You've got to be able to look beyond that, and you've got to make some decisions. And to be honest, I'm very grateful for what we have at Spaceship, because we've got a really good group of people that understand that we're building a scientific function for product development, and they're coming on the journey, which is really, really cool, because it's helping us make better decisions about what we do, what we don't do, how we do it, and how not to do it.
It's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Andrew. Like, I totally agree with that. Like what you said there. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to consume all that knowledge there. Actually, just before we wrap up, like, is there anything else that you'd like to share, or any final things that you'd like to give us an advice on?
Look, I'm not sure, because I'm not a real fountain of wisdom, if that makes sense. I'm just talking through my personal experience, and you know, there are other experiences out there that will kind of ratify some of what I said, will kind of contradict some of what I said. So, to as many good leaders as you can. Learn from them. Learn from leaders who you don't deem as good leaders. Learn what not to do from them, and be the leader that you want to be led by, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have to wait until you're managing a team or have that title to be the leader. And as a designer, you have an unfair advantage. Use it. Yeah. Put things in people's hands. If you truly believe in it, spend that extra time designing it, prototyping it, put it in someone's hands and say, hey, just to show you how much I believe in this, this is how it can work. And if they can kind of play around with it and come back to you and say, I still don't back you, then you've done all you can.
100%, totally agree.